parents are so quick to want to go to, I want my kids to figure out how not to melt down. I want them to figure out how to work through frustration better. And that's an important objective, but if they don't even know what they're feeling, like that's the foundational building block. That's why we start with vocabulary. We've got to figure out what is it that I'm feeling so that I can then figure out what to do with it.
Welcome to the Focus on the Family broadcast, helping families thrive.
We ended last time talking about, the impact of a dad on the daughter. We talked about boys and how they respond to mom and some of those basic things, identifying the stumbling blocks, as you call them. And Sissy, you talked about control of a little girl, what she's developing there, kind of the insecurities of that, wanting to be perfect, that idea of perfection. And again, if you missed that, get it. I want to come back to that briefly on the anxiety side. And this can be both a mom or a dad. But when you see anxiety in a child, what do you normally see in the parent?
Well, there's a lot of research that says anxiety is a childhood epidemic in America today. I think from our counseling offices, we would say anxiety is a parenting epidemic in America today.
It's a parenting epidemic because parents are the ones who are anxious and we're transferring it to our kids.
Yes. And some of it, I think, is really overcompensating, that I think we all are kind of near the same age, and we grew up in a generation where we weren't talking about our feelings. And our parents weren't often asking us about our feelings. And so maybe we had anxiety and no one ever knew. And so we're seeing parents who are over talking with their kids and really trying to step in and fix it, like you said.
Yeah.
And basically what experts will say is with anxiety, to work through it, the child just has to do the scary thing. And so when we don't let them, we're in effect preventing them from working through it. But they need to do it in a gradual way, but they still got to do it.
Sure. Give me a handle. I'm a mom or a dad. David, you can jump in on the dad side here. What is that handle for a quick self-assessment that I'm dipping toward anxiety? How do I see it in myself with my child? What would be some of those experiences? If you're doing this, then you may be informing your child in an unhealthy way.
Are you doing it for them? Or are you stepping in and removing whatever is causing the anxiety in the first place? If it's track, are you letting her quit the track team immediately without pushing through and having to work through it a little harder?
Doing the homework.
Doing the homework, going to school. I had a family recently who a lot of kids have some school refusal where they're worried about going to school. And there are ways that you can help them work through that without just pulling them. And I saw a family who had completely pulled their daughter from school. And by the time I got with her, it was obvious she was in complete control of her house. And that's part of it, is they've got to know that we're bigger. That makes them feel safe, like we talked about.
David, what about boys in that same way? Do they suffer from some insecurity?
Oh, absolutely they do. And I was even thinking when you were asking that question about parents, where I mentioned earlier with boys, I'll do a lot of training around listening to your body and figuring out when your body's signaling an alarm. And I have to do a lot of that with parents. Like, we laugh about how often we'll have parents in our office who will say things like, he's so worried, and I don't know where that comes from. And you're thinking, really?
Feels palpable
But
on
I've
you.
challenged parents, hopefully in a respectful way, to just say, like, are you aware even right now? Like, your voice is elevated. Your hands are clenched at this point. You're yelling as we talk, like not listening to the signals your own body is giving you in
Well, I
those
think
moments.
that's the reason for my question, is that our self-awareness can be really diminished in this area of parenting.
Yes.
Because it's so close in. We're going to be far more self-aware in a social setting, in a workplace. But at home, we're kind of just who we are.
Oh, yes.
That's where we're relaxing, at least in terms of facades.
We
Yeah.
talk
Is that
a lot.
fair?
We talk a lot in the book about parenting out of love and not out of fear. And
Yeah.
that's kind of the bottom line in that.
That is so true. And I think the key thing there is, what I'm trying to pull out is, how does a parent do a quick self-assessment that I am a fear-based parent and I've got to change? And I know there's no quick way to do that, but I'm just thinking of the poor mom or the poor dad listening who is saying, okay, I think I do parent out of fear. How do we confirm that for them? What would you say?
In the chapter on awareness, we do talk with parents about the importance of not only knowing your stuff, checking your baggage, but talking openly, obviously age appropriately, with our kids too, to be able to say things to them like, you know what, I have a tendency to bend toward catastrophic thinking. Like, that's kind of where I go. I go quickly to worst case scenarios. And so being able to say those things, telling ourselves in that way, and understanding what do I need in response to that. Like we've talked about empathy and questions and coffee and queso. The third kind of magic equation we talk a lot with parents about is time and space. And to be able to say to the kids we love, you know what? I'm amped up right now. Like I'm flooded with worry right now. Like in this moment, I don't feel like I'm in with boys, I call it your dinosaur brain or your thinking brain, your emotional brain or your thinking brain. For us as parents to be able to say, I'm not in my thinking brain right now. I love you too much to argue, so I'm going to go take 15 minutes to walk the dog, do whatever I need to do at this point, and then we'll come back together and talk so that I'm not parenting out of fear, so that I'm not parenting out of emotion. When we're emotionally charged, kids or adults in those moments, it's like what happens when I go to the grocery store on an empty stomach. I don't make thoughtful decisions.
Let's move to empathy. Talk about the importance of empathy, what empathy is, and teaching your child how to express empathy. It's kind of a big question there, but either one of you just kick it off.
Maybe a short definition would be if vocabulary, the milestone of vocabulary is reading emotions, empathy is responding to emotions. So it's the ability to kind of look at you and have some sense of what's going on inside of you, climb into your shoes. And we know there's so much research out there that continues to confirm that empathy is one of the most foundational ingredients in healthy interpersonal relationships of all kinds. Marriage relationships, parent to child, coworker relationships. So we don't really need to have much of any conversation about whether we think it's important or useful. It is, no doubt about it, and the research continues to confirm it. So we go to kind of where we go in the empathy chapter, and every chapter is breaking down what are the stumbling blocks for boys, what are the stumbling blocks for girls, what are the building blocks for boys, building blocks for girls, and then at the end of every chapter is 10 practical, easy, user-friendly ways that a parent can be doing this in your home every day.
Well, let's go with the boys. What are the stumbling blocks, and then what are those antidotes to help them?
Oftentimes with boys, the first and biggest is going to be awareness. Like where he has trouble reading his own emotions, it's all the more difficult to read it on others. And so one of the practices I recommend for parents is doing a lot of people studies. If you're just sitting in restaurant, airport, I'm like, what do you think that guy over there is feeling? What do you think's going on? He's talking on the phone. Having him be able to look and put some of those puzzle pieces together, using movies, hitting pause at different points on the way when we're watching movies or reading books with kids and kind of doing a little dissecting in those moments is a useful practice with a lot of boys.
Yeah. If you have an older child now and you're feeling, I'm not even sure what a red flag would look like if they're not empathizing. Give me an example, a practical example where you have a 15, 16-year-old and the alarm bell should be going off. What would that look like, and then what can you do?
Well, one of the first things we would say, I think, for boys and for girls with adolescents, and this is a part of where just letting development serve as a backdrop is so important that we acknowledge one of the things that's at play with every adolescent is they're thinking more about themselves than others.
Now, at 5, 6, 7, that's kind of normal, right?
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
hard to raise a child up at that age to say, be empathetic.
And it's normal at 15, 16, 17. We could add a 1 to each of those numbers, too.
Yes.
Well, I hope that they would have more coping skill at that point, more ability to be able to do that.
They would, but what could get in the way is that reality of I'm thinking so much about myself and I'm insecure and unsteady inside of myself that I can't be as aware of you. It's not that I don't want to or have the skills to, but I'm so roadblocked by adolescence in those moments.
And
so,
that's like my complexion is bad, or I don't stand out the way I want to. I stand out in a bad way, so I can't even get outside of that.
Yes, and there's, for years developmental psychologists have called one of the things that happens in adolescence the imaginary audience, this phenomena that kids are believing in all moments. I'm being observed, critiqued, watched, talked about.
It's pretty much true.
Yeah.
And now more
social
than ever,
media has
because of
confirmed that to be the case. And so kids are so consumed with that, they can't be aware of others in ways that they'll have the capacity to do differently, say, for example, in their 20s. And that feels so foundational to us to talk about and understand, because in those moments, you mentioned this earlier, a parent could easily go to a place of just thinking, oh my goodness, he's 16 and he doesn't have any evidence of empathy. And I would always push back on that and to say, he's 16
Okay.
and likely doesn't have a lot of evidence in some moments.
Yeah.
But requiring him to be in situations, something as simple as an elderly neighbor on our street lost a spouse. So let's write a note to that person and take it. You found out, my son's at 15, just found out beloved soccer coach lost his mom. And I'm like, let's write him a note at this point and practice role play, having a conversation. A 15-year-old boy doesn't know naturally how to approach a coach they love and respect and acknowledge that he lost someone he loves.
And
so
that's
that's something we have to practice.
And
No
that's
different than riding a bike.
what you call a building block.
It is.
And that's really interesting to think of it that way, because I think sometimes as parents we look at that and of course you should know what that means. You should be empathetic. And then we get, we lack patience
Yes.
with that child, that they don't know how to react, but we got to teach them how to react.
We
That's
do.
a great point.
We do. I remember when one of my sons was in 6th grade, he came home and was aware that one of his best buddies' parents were going through a really hard, high-conflict divorce. And he said, Dad, I want to check on him, but I'm worried if I ask him about it at school, it'll make him too sad. And I'm worried if I don't ask him, he'll think I don't care. And don't we all know that tension as
What a
grown-ups?
great question for him to ask
And
you.
that's a great example. He didn't instinctively know how to ask the right amount. And so we've got to practice those kinds of conversations with kids so they can develop empathy.
Well, and I love that the way that you've built the book with those stumbling blocks and then building blocks. Sissy, let's go to the girl side of empathy.
I was about to say, on the flip side of David's story, I had a girl that I was working with who was a 7th grader, because girls just inherently, I think, have more empathy from their earliest stages, but they lose it in adolescence. And she said to me, my best friend and I are so close. We talk about everything. We share everything. I think her parents got divorced last year, but I'm not really sure. So great picture of a total lack of empathy in her adolescence, but that's really normal for her too.
Oh, that's interesting. Sissy, I'm not going to let you off the hook that easy when it comes to the girls, though, because in the book you talk at length about narcissism. Now, I always think of that as an adult feature, because you've lived enough life, you disregard people, the whole universe is about you. And it takes a little time to get there, I thought. But you subscribe narcissism to young girls. It's a normal kind of growth pattern. Tell me what you're driving at with narcissism.
Well, I think it starts typically around the age of 11 when puberty kicks in. But now we have girls who are starting their periods as young as 8. So you can see strains of it earlier on. And it typically by about junior year, they're cycling out of it, which is the great news. But all girls are narcissistic to some degree, like David talked about. They're thinking about themselves perpetually, and they're thinking about what other people are thinking about them. And so social media has made that significantly worse because it's in their face all of the time. And so with girls, I think we want to continue to remind them of who they are in terms of caring, that they're thoughtful of other people, that relationships matter to them. We want to give them opportunities to grow those skills in every way possible. And I think, again, because girls are empathetic more naturally just with who God's made them to be, and that difference, like we talked about, one of the things that we really look at is, I think with all of us, we have this language that's happening verbally, but with girls, there's this sub-language that goes on that's nonverbal, that's kind of this undercurrent. And when girls start to miss that, we become concerned that there's something more going on, such as ADHD, anxiety. Those are two things that make them start to miss social cues. And so they lag behind even farther. And those girls are going to have a harder time developing empathy a lot of times.
Yeah, and in that context, you're wanting to develop awareness and humility.
Right.
How does a parent go about developing humility? I mean, I got a couple of ideas, but they may not be the most appropriate. But you've got to be kind of mindful of how to do that, not draconian.
Well, and again, I think because girls by nature want to offer something of themselves. They want to care about other people. They have more oxytocins flooding their brains, which is the nurturing hormone. And so how do we get them in places developmentally where they are serving? I think that's really a bottom line. And so taking them to a soup kitchen to help serve, taking them on mission trips, and again, with that narcissistic adolescent thing they got going on, those years especially are important for them to be often even having experiences away from home, away from their parents, where they get to feel like they're making a difference. Because that's one of the places we get most concerned about kids anyway when we talk about depression, is those kids start to believe they don't matter.
Right.
And so, how can we give kids an opportunity at each stage developmentally to feel like I really do make a difference in the life of somebody else, and when it doesn't come naturally to me?
Well, that's so good in the book for the parent of a 7th, 8th, ninth grader. I mean, again, these are phases. Your kids are going to go through difficult moments. Some of it's going to be hormonal. And to better understand it is critical. So you're not freaking out as a mom and dad saying, oh my goodness, we have an axe murderer. No, this is
Or
just...
narcissistic personality disorder growing in our house.
That would not be good either.
No.
But it's just, it's being mindful of it and taking the long view and understanding where you're at. David, let's go to that boy, maybe that little boy, and they're expressing blame or avoidance or denial, kind of the stumbling blocks for that little boy when it comes to resourcefulness. What is resourcefulness, and what do those stumbling blocks look like?
Resourcefulness is really taking the emotion to something constructive. It's problem solving, it's strategizing, it's critical thinking, and it's kind of part of that two-part agenda we talked about earlier, figuring out what do I feel and then what to do with it. It's the what to do with it part. And boys, I love helping boys develop in this area because I think, again, as males, we're kind of natural problem solvers. So this is flexing a little stronger muscle. But the 3 stumbling blocks you mentioned are kind of his biggest roadblocks of blame, avoidance, and denial. I have that acronym of BAD in the book because I think boys do a lot of, in the face of failure or in the face of difficulty, swinging between blame and self-hatred, somewhere between it's your fault and I'm an idiot. And they have a hard time getting to that good, healthy middle space. Like I had a conversation with an 11-year-old boy just yesterday in my office, and he struck out 3 times in the same baseball game. And he was talking his way through it. And the things I heard from him were those 2 extremes. Like the pitcher couldn't even throw the ball. There's blame. And then he got to at some point in a teary moment, I'm the worst player on the team. But nowhere in the middle was the sense of, I had an off day. Right. I missed practice one day this week, and I was a little bit, not as in my rhythm. Like there were all these different factors that I had to lead him to that he just couldn't get to easily on his own. And so I think as long as a boy is swinging between those 2 places, it's really hard for him to develop.
How does a mom or a dad minimize that pendulum effect? How do you narrow that in? What can you say that will help them cope better and equip them better?
I do think that empathy and questions formula is really useful in these moments of that sounds hard. Sometimes when they're stuck in blame, it's tell me what you think your part was in it. What was your contribution? Or we laugh. I have a story at the beginning of that chapter about when my sons were 6. And this is an example of how early it starts with boys. We had a soccer game. We're running around the house on a Saturday morning. And my son walked up to my wife and said, what did you do with my soccer cleats? Like nothing in him thought to say, did you see where I left them? Do you have any idea where I put them? And so in those moments, rather than just, again, coddling, like I'm going to go to finding them for him, my wife looked at him and said, I didn't wear them. I didn't wear those with my black skirt. She was a little playful for a moment. Like, where did you leave them last? Yeah. Like helping him move towards some problem solving on his own as opposed to doing it for him, but not letting him stay stuck in blame.
I'm still thinking about the kid, the 11-year-old who struck out. So what kind of counseling can you give that boy to find the answer?
Yes.
Not tell him, but to find the answer himself.
We spent some time on the front side, just a few minutes kind of connecting the dots on helping him see where he was swinging from one side to the other. Like I highlighted for him, like the 2 things I've heard the most from you are he couldn't pitch the ball and I'm a loser. And so we talked a little bit about what those messages are and the 2 extremes in language that's doable for him. And then I said, what are the other possibilities of what could have happened? And that's how he got to that place saying, well, I did miss practice once this week and felt like I had an off day because actually I played a great game on Tuesday. So he could kind of anchor himself to some truth after a little digging in and exploration.
That is really helpful. I'm thinking of that just in my own parenting, my own fathering. Those are good things to come back around on. And when you notice them not doing as well, ask those empathetic questions. I like that. Sissy, how about for the girls when it comes to resourcefulness? What's their stumbling block and what's the building block for them?
I think girls, for any of us, when we come up to a roadblock, resourcefulness is really working our way around it. And I have more and more girls who just sit down by the roadblock. Some of them plant flowers. Some of them draw pictures. They don't even care about getting around it. And
Why is it important?
right. Why is it important? Yeah. And so motivation is one of the building blocks that we talk a lot about. And I think sometimes we're imposing our motivation on them rather than helping them find theirs. And so we keep going back to empathy and questions. But I think even in those times, I mean, one of the questions I ask the most in my counseling office is, what do you want? What do you want to happen here? What do you think, again, is what do you think is going to help? What can you do next? Because sometimes it's the pressure. They sit down because all they can see is the long range goal, and I don't know how to get there. So what's the next step? What can you do next? Those kind of practical questions.
You know, I want to end with this question, and for each of you to answer this, because I think you know, you're doing counseling, you have the techniques of counseling. These are things that we believe as Christians are all rooted in biblical truth. I think we can all agree to that. Why do you think God does it this way? I mean, when you look at the little years of trying to teach them, and then those hormonal adolescent years, and then puberty hits, and you got the teen years, when you're looking at the big picture, what does God want from us as a parent, as a father, David, and as a mother, Sissy?
I would say I think what he wants most for me as a father is to be transformed more into the image of his son. And he's going to use these beings to disrupt me and take me to the end of myself and help me figure out I'm making more of a mess than I'm doing it well in a lot of moments, and that there's grace for that. And we talk about this in the spiritual milestones of just how we cannot really understand the beauty of grace unless we understand the depths of our need. And so I think that's what it's about for me more than anything.
Sissy, in that mom space, the mom that's to her wit's end, she's so worried. She's not in control. All the things we've talked about this last couple of days. How does she wrestle herself away from that and actually trust God, even in the midst of really serious stuff?
I would say a lot of dependence, just like David talked about. And that one of the things I sit with moms and talk about all the time is God gave you exactly what you need already for the life of each of your kids, even the one that's the most challenging. And that child really, in effect, will be the most transformative. And will teach you your need for Jesus and his grace and mercy for you, so that you in turn can spill it over to them, because that's so much of what we do when we love kids.
Boy, it's so good. And you have done a wonderful job in this book, Are My Kids on Track? The 12 Emotional, Social, and Spiritual Milestones Your Child Needs to Reach. I mean, so many parents contacting us here at Focus on the Family are saying, am I doing the right job? This is one of those resources, these tools that can really enlighten you as to whether you are. And I've loved what I've heard, David and Sissy. Thank you so much for being here with us. We so appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. We've loved it.
Hey, I'm John Fuller, and thanks for watching. Get more info about Focus over here and more from our guests over there, and be sure to subscribe to our channel as well.